You're not tired because you do too much. You're tired because your mind never stops talking. From the moment you wake up, it's already working. Replaying conversations, rewriting mistakes, predicting problems that don't exist yet. And the strange thing is, it feels responsible. It feels like intelligence. Overthinking feels like control. But it isn't. It's fear, wearing the mask of preparation. You tell yourself you're being careful, that you're just trying to get it right, that thinking more will finally bring peace. But it never does. The thoughts don't end. They multiply, and slowly, quietly, they drain you. You don't collapse. You don't break down. You just feel constantly tired, mentally heavy, always on, always reacting. And here's what most people get wrong. This isn't because you're weak. It's not because you lack discipline or focus or intelligence. In fact, overthinkers are often the most capable people in the room. Your mind is powerful. The problem is, it's undirected, so it turns against itself. The Stoics understood this long before modern life made it worse. They didn't see mental noise as normal. They saw it as dangerous, because a mind that never rests cannot choose clearly, and a man who cannot choose clearly will always feel anxious, even when nothing is wrong. Think about it. Most of your stress today isn't caused by what's happening. It's caused by what might happen, what could go wrong, what someone might think. Your body is sitting still, but your mind is fighting 10 imaginary battles at once. That's why you feel exhausted even on days when you do very little, and no one ever teaches you how to stop. They tell you to think it through, be prepared, stay alert, but no one tells you when to be silent. The Stoics did. They believed peace wasn't found by solving every thought, but by refusing to chase them, because not every thought deserves your attention. And here's the hard truth. If you don't decide which thoughts you engage with, the loudest ones will decide for you. That's why you replay old conversations, why small comments stay with you for days, why you explain yourself to people who already decided not to understand you. It feels like strength, but it's not. It's your mind seeking safety in places it will never find it. The Stoics called this slavery. Not slavery to people, not slavery to circumstances, slavery to your own thoughts. And freedom to them wasn't comfort. It was control. Control over attention. Control over reaction. Control over what you allow into your inner world. Because once you master that, the outside world loses its grip on you. This video isn't about stopping thoughts completely. That's impossible. It's about learning which thoughts deserve your energy and which ones are just noise. It's about becoming calm, not because life is easy, but because your mind is disciplined. And over the next hour, you're going to learn how the Stoics trained this discipline. Not through motivation, not through positive thinking, but through quiet rules that made their minds unshakable in chaos, loss, pressure, and pain. If your mind feels loud right now, if you feel constantly tense, restless, or mentally crowded, you're exactly where you need to be. Because the goal isn't to escape your thoughts, it's to command them. And that is where real strength begins. Overthinking does not begin because your mind is broken. It begins because you were never taught how to relate to your thoughts. Most people grow up believing that every thought deserves attention, that if something appears in the mind, it must be analyzed, questioned, solved. But the Stoics understood something that modern culture ignores. A thought is not an order. It is not a fact. It is not a command. It is an event. It arrives. It lingers. And if you do nothing, it leaves. The problem is not that thoughts appear. The problem is that you follow them. Every spiral begins the same way. A single thought enters the mind, a memory, a worry, a hypothetical future, a replayed conversation. And instead of letting it pass, you step inside it. You begin negotiating, defending, explaining, rewriting, preparing responses for conversations that may never happen. What feels like thinking is often just obedience, and obedience to the wrong voice creates noise. The Stoics did not try to silence the mind. They trained themselves to observe it. They treated thoughts the way a soldier treats distant noise on the battlefield. Not everything you hear is a signal. Not everything requires a response. This is where mental clarity begins, not by stopping thought, but by refusing automatic compliance. Notice how overthinking feels in the body, the tension in the jaw, the pressure behind the eyes, the tightness in the chest. That sensation is not danger. It is the nervous system reacting to imagined authority. A thought appeared, and your body prepared for action. But action was never required. This is why clarity feels rare. Because the mind has been placed in charge of decisions it was never meant to make. The Stoics reversed this relationship. They did not ask their thoughts for permission. They decided who they were first. Then they allowed thoughts to exist without ruling them. Here is a quiet truth that changes everything. You are aware of your thoughts, which means you are not your thoughts. Something that can be observed cannot be the observer. Once this becomes clear, the urgency collapses. Thoughts lose their grip not because they disappear, but because they are no longer believed automatically. Consider how many thoughts you have in a day that never come true. Predictions, fears, imagined judgments from others. And yet the body reacts as if each one is real. This is the cost of mental obedience. The Stoics trained a pause, a space between thought and response. Not a dramatic pause, not a forced stillness. A simple internal posture that says, I see you. You are allowed to exist, but you do not decide my direction. That posture alone quiets the mind, not instantly, but reliably. Because overthinking feeds on urgency. And urgency dissolves when authority is reclaimed. There is a reason the Stoics spoke so often about discipline of assent. Assent means agreement. Not every thought deserves agreement. Some thoughts are background noise, some are old conditioning, some are echoes of past environments that no longer exist. Mental clarity is not about thinking better thoughts. It is about choosing which thoughts you allow to shape your behavior. When this becomes your default, overthinking loses its power. The mind still speaks, but it no longer shouts. If this resonates, you may notice that you have already practiced this before. Moments when a thought appeared and you chose not to react. Moments when you stayed silent instead of explaining. When you moved forward instead of rehearsing. When you acted without waiting for certainty. Those moments felt different, lighter, cleaner, more grounded. That is not coincidence. That is clarity emerging. And clarity is not found by adding more thought. It is found by subtracting obedience. If you recognize this pattern in yourself, write this quietly in the comments. I do not obey every thought, not as a declaration of strength, but as a reminder of posture, because the mind will test this again, and again, and again. And each time you have the opportunity to respond differently. In the next principle, we will expose the hidden mechanism that makes thoughts feel heavier than they are. Not because life is overwhelming, but because perception has been trained to amplify pressure. That realization alone changes how the mind experiences difficulty. Most people believe pressure comes from life, from responsibilities, from expectations, from circumstances beyond their control. But pressure is not created by events, it is created by interpretation. Two people can face the same situation. One remains steady, the other feels crushed. The difference is not strength, it is not intelligence, it is not luck. It is the story being told internally. The Stoics were ruthless about this distinction. They separated what happens from what it means, and they trained themselves to live inside that separation. Pressure feels overwhelming when the mind treats everything as personal. Every delay becomes a failure. Every silence becomes rejection. Every obstacle becomes a verdict on your worth. This is not reality. This is interpretation running unchecked. The mind has a habit of enlarging what it touches. A single problem becomes a pattern. A difficult day becomes a difficult life. A moment of doubt becomes an identity. This is how mental weight accumulates. Not because life is heavy, but because meaning has been piled onto every experience. The Stoics refused this habit. They stripped events down to their raw form. What happened? Nothing more, nothing less. No added narrative, no imagined future, no emotional forecast. This practice alone reduces pressure dramatically, because pressure thrives on projection. It feeds on imagined consequences, on assumed judgments, on future scenarios rehearsed as if they were already real. When those projections are removed, what remains is manageable, often surprisingly small. Consider how often the mind says, "This is too much." Too much compared to what? Too much based on which standard? Too much according to which imagined outcome? Most of the time, the mind is reacting to a version of reality that does not exist. The Stoics called this suffering in advance, carrying pain that has not arrived, fighting battles that are still theoretical. This is why clarity feels elusive during stress. The mind is not dealing with the present. It is dealing with multiple imagined futures simultaneously, and no nervous system can remain calm under that load. The Stoic response was not optimism. It was precision. They asked one quiet question internally. What part of this is actually happening right now? Not what might happen. Not what could happen. Not what once happened. Right now. This question collapses pressure instantly, because most pressure lives everywhere except the present moment. Right now, you are listening, breathing, sitting, standing, moving. Right now, nothing catastrophic is occurring, and when the mind is returned to what is real, its volume drops. This is not denial, it is grounding. The Stoics did not pretend difficulties were pleasant, they simply refused to exaggerate them. Exaggeration is the mind's favorite defense mechanism. It believes that by amplifying threat, it is keeping you safe. In reality, it is exhausting you. Mental clarity does not come from removing challenges. It comes from removing distortion. When interpretation is disciplined, pressure becomes information instead of weight, a signal rather than a burden. This changes how you move through difficulty. You stop bracing. You stop tensing in advance. You stop mentally rehearsing collapse. You respond instead of react, and response requires far less energy. Notice how different it feels to say internally, "This is uncomfortable," versus, This is unbearable. One is honest, the other is catastrophic. The Stoics trained honesty without drama. They allowed discomfort, they refused despair. That balance is the foundation of a quiet mind. If this feels familiar, you may recognize moments when pressure dissolved unexpectedly. Times when a feared situation arrived and felt smaller than imagined. Times when the build-up was worse than the event itself. That gap is interpretation collapsing. That is clarity reclaiming space. This is why mental calm does not require a perfect life. It requires accurate perception. If this resonates, write this in the comments. I deal with what is real, not as a promise. As a posture, because the mind will attempt to inflate things again. And each time, you have a choice: to follow the story, or to return to the facts. In the next principle, we will confront the habit that keeps the mind looping endlessly. Not external distraction, but the internal refusal to let things be unfinished. That habit quietly fuels overthinking more than almost anything else. There is a specific kind of mental exhaustion that comes from trying to manage things that were never meant to be managed by you. It doesn't come from laziness. It doesn't come from weakness. It comes from overextension of the mind. You feel it when you replay conversations that already ended, when you rehearse outcomes that haven't happened, when you carry responsibility for reactions, opinions, and events that exist entirely outside your reach. This is not clarity. This is cognitive overload. The Stoics were ruthless about this distinction. They divided life into two simple categories: what belongs to you and what does not. Your thoughts, your judgments, your intentions, your actions, those belong to you. Other people's reactions, their opinions, their approval, their misunderstandings, the outcome of events once you've acted, those do not. Mental clarity collapses the moment these two categories are mixed. Most people do not lose peace because life is cruel. They lose peace because they are trying to govern territory they do not own. You see this everywhere. Someone says something careless and the mind spins for hours. Someone misunderstands you and the chest tightens. Plans change. Effort goes unnoticed. Recognition does not arrive. And instead of responding, the mind begins negotiating with reality. If only they understood. If only I explained it better. If only I could influence this outcome. That negotiation never ends, because reality does not negotiate. Epictetus warned about this exact trap. He said that when you attach your peace to what you cannot command, you hand over your freedom voluntarily. Not forcefully, voluntarily. This is where mental clarity erodes quietly, not in crisis, not in catastrophe, but in constant micro-control, trying to predict, trying to influence, trying to manage perceptions, trying to steer the weather. The Stoic response is not indifference, it is precision. You are responsible for the effort, not the result. You are responsible for speaking honestly, not for being understood. You are responsible for discipline, not for recognition. The moment this line is crossed, clarity returns, because the mind no longer carries excess weight. Think about how much mental space is consumed daily by things that cannot be corrected in the moment. Past conversations, future scenarios, other people's moods, external timing. None of these respond to mental pressure, yet pressure is applied anyway. This is how overthinking disguises itself as responsibility. It feels noble, it feels mature, it feels like caring. But in reality, it is misdirected control. The Stoics would say, energy placed where it has no leverage becomes anxiety. Energy placed where it has leverage becomes strength. Notice the difference. One drains, the other builds. Most people have never been taught that releasing control is not giving up. It is reallocating attention. When the mind stops policing the uncontrollable, it becomes sharp again. Decisions become simpler. Reactions slow down. Judgment clears. Not because life becomes easier, but because the noise decreases. This principle becomes especially powerful in modern life, where you are constantly exposed to opinions, metrics, feedback, comparison. You are shown what others think before you even decide what you think. That is not neutral. That is mentally invasive. Stoicism teaches something radical here. You do not owe your nervous system constant engagement. You are allowed to leave things unresolved when resolution is not within your domain. You are allowed to act well without watching the scoreboard. You are allowed to be misunderstood without correcting every assumption. This is not avoidance. It is command. If this principle feels uncomfortable, that's a signal. Not that it's wrong, but the control has been overextended for a long time. Notice where your attention goes after you've already done what you could. Notice how often the mind reopens a closed door. That reopening is optional, and clarity begins the moment you stop reopening it. A simple practice emerges from this principle. When the mind tightens, quietly separate effort from outcome. I did my part. This reaction is not mine. This result no longer belongs to me. No drama, no affirmation, just accuracy. Over time, this recalibrates the nervous system. The mind learns where to rest, and when the mind knows where to rest, clarity returns naturally. If this principle resonates, write this in the comments. I release what was never mine to control. Not as a declaration to others, as a reminder to yourself. Because the quieter your internal world becomes, the more precise your external actions grow. There is a quiet kind of suffering that doesn't look dramatic from the outside. You wake up, you function, you respond to messages, you show up. But inside, your mind is constantly trying to manage things it cannot reach. Other people's reactions, other people's moods, outcomes that have not happened yet, mistakes that already happened. You replay conversations, you rehearse arguments that may never occur. You try to predict how everything will unfold so you can finally relax. But relaxation never comes. Because the problem is not that you lack control. The problem is that you are trying to control what was never given to you in the first place. The Stoics were brutally clear about this, even if modern culture avoids saying it. Not everything that affects your life belongs to you. Some things pass through you. Some things touch you. Some things disturb you. But they are not yours to command. And the mind becomes heavy the moment it forgets this boundary. Think carefully about this. How much of your daily mental energy is spent on things that are not actually within your hands? Other people's opinions, whether someone understands you, whether your effort is noticed, whether the future unfolds the way you hope. This kind of mental labor feels responsible. It feels mature. It feels like preparation. But in reality, it is a form of resistance. Resistance to uncertainty. Resistance to vulnerability. Resistance to accepting that life is not a machine you can operate. And the Stoics saw this resistance as the root of mental exhaustion. They did not teach passivity. They taught precision. They taught you to place your effort exactly where it can work and nowhere else. because every ounce of attention spent outside your sphere of control weakens the attention available within it. This is why your mind feels tired even when your body has not moved. You are carrying weight that was never assigned to you. The Stoic does not ask, "How do I control everything?" The Stoic asks, "What actually belongs to me in this moment?" And the answer is far smaller and far more powerful than most people expect. Your judgments, your intentions, your actions. That is it. Not the outcome of those actions, not how others receive them, not whether the world cooperates. Only the choice to act with clarity, restraint, and integrity right now. Everything else is external. And when you stop pretending otherwise, something subtle but profound happens. The mind begins to release its grip. Not because life becomes easy, but because the internal struggle ends. You are no longer fighting reality. You are standing inside it. Many people misunderstand this principle and assume it means indifference. It does not. The Stoic still cares deeply, but they care cleanly. They invest fully in what they can shape, and they allow the rest to unfold without demanding obedience from it. This distinction is what separates strength from strain. Think about how often frustration arises from unmet expectations. You expected appreciation. You expected fairness. You expected things to go according to plan. And when they didn't, the mind spiraled. Not because something went wrong, but because you believed something external owed you a specific result. The Stoics would say this gently but firmly. Expectation is the contract you write with the future, without its consent. And when that contract is broken, you suffer twice. Once from the event itself, and once from the belief that it should not have happened. Mental clarity begins when you stop negotiating with reality, not in bitterness, not in defeat, but in alignment. You do what is yours to do. You say what is yours to say. You choose what is yours to choose. Then you let go. This is not weakness. This is discipline. It takes immense strength to act without clinging to outcome, to speak without demanding validation, to move forward without guarantees. Most people cannot tolerate this uncertainty, so they exhaust themselves trying to eliminate it. The Stoic trains instead to endure it. There is a quiet freedom in knowing, I have done my part, even if the result disappoints, even if no one notices, even if the world responds unpredictably. Your peace no longer depends on external alignment. It depends on internal coherence. And this is why Stoic clarity feels different from modern motivation. Modern motivation says, control more, optimize more, predict more. Stoicism says, choose well and release the rest. Notice how your mind reacts to this idea. If there is resistance, that resistance is informative. It often reveals where attachment has replaced responsibility. Ask yourself gently, what am I still trying to control that keeps slipping through my hands? Not to judge yourself, not to suppress the desire, just to see it clearly. Because clarity precedes release. The Stoics believed that suffering is not caused by events, but by the judgments we attach to them. And control is one of the most seductive judgments of all. It whispers, if I think hard enough, plan well enough, worry long enough, I can make this safe. But safety is not something life offers unconditionally. What life offers is the opportunity to respond with character, and character is entirely yours. This principle, practiced daily, begins to lighten the mind. You stop rehearsing conversations that haven't happened. You stop carrying responsibility for other people's emotions. You stop punishing yourself for outcomes you could not command. Not overnight, but gradually, with repetition. And each time you release what was never yours, you reclaim energy for what is. Your attention sharpens, your decisions simplify, your inner noise quiets. Not because the world becomes calm, but because you stop demanding that it be. This is one of the most powerful shifts a person can make, and it does not require dramatic change, only honest placement of effort. So as you move through the rest of your day, pay attention to where your mind tenses. Ask quietly, is this within my control? If it is, act. If it is not, release. No resentment, no force, just clarity. That is how the Stoic mind remains steady, even when everything else feels heavy. One of the most exhausting habits of the modern mind is this: living everywhere except where you are. Your body may be here, but your attention is already ahead of you, behind you, elsewhere. You replay something that happened. You anticipate something that might happen. You argue with a version of the future that does not yet exist. And while all of this happens internally, life continues, unattended. The Stoics understood something that modern culture rarely teaches. The mind does not suffer because the present moment is unbearable. It suffers because it refuses to stay there. Overthinking is not depth, it is displacement. It pulls your attention away from the only place where action is possible. Now, not later, not after you feel ready. Not once everything makes sense. Now. This is why Stoic clarity is grounded, not abstract. It does not ask you to solve your entire life. It asks you to return to the task in front of you, fully, because a scattered mind is not weak, it is overloaded, and overload does not require more thinking. It requires containment. The Stoics practiced something radical in its simplicity. They narrowed their attention, not because they lacked imagination, but because they respected their limits. They understood that attention is a finite resource, and when it is spread thin across past and future, nothing receives enough care. This is why overthinking feels busy but produces nothing. The mind appears active, yet no real movement occurs. You are running internally, while standing still externally. And the longer this continues, the heavier everything feels. Mental clarity begins when you stop asking, what does all of this mean? And start asking, what is required of me right now? Not what might be required. Not what could go wrong. Not what you should have done differently. What is required here. The Stoics believed that peace is not found by escaping thought, but by anchoring it. Anchoring it in action. Anchoring it in duty. Anchoring it in the present. This is not mindfulness in the modern sense, it is responsibility. When you overthink, you are often trying to live multiple lives at once. The life you are in, the life you fear, the life you regret, the life you hope for. The Stoic chooses instead to live one life, deliberately. This is why they emphasized practice over theory. A principle means nothing if it does not translate into behavior, and this principle is practiced by returning, again and again, to what is directly in front of you. The conversation you are having, the work you are doing, the step you can take. Not perfectly, not dramatically, just fully. Notice how the mind resists this. It will say, this is too small. This doesn't solve the bigger problem. I need to figure everything out first. But the bigger problem is often created by neglecting the smaller one. Chaos grows where attention is absent. Clarity grows where attention is applied. The Stoics trained themselves to ask, what can be done without delay? This question cuts through noise. It removes the illusion that clarity must come before action. In reality, action often creates clarity. Not reckless action, not frantic motion, but deliberate engagement, one task, one decision, one moment at a time. This is why Stoicism does not promise comfort, it promises steadiness. And steadiness is built by repetition. Each time the mind drifts into rumination, you bring it back. Not harshly, not impatiently, but firmly. Back to the breath, back to the hands, back to the task. This is not suppression, it is training. Over time, the mind learns where it belongs. Most people never teach their attention where to rest. So it wanders endlessly, searching for certainty it will never find. The Stoic gives attention a home. The present moment is not peaceful by default, but it is workable, and workability is enough. You do not need the entire future to be clear. You need the next step to be honest. You do not need your past to make sense. You need your present actions to align. This is where mental quiet begins, not in answers, but in engagement. Consider how much mental noise disappears when you're fully absorbed in something real, not distracted, not multitasking, just present. That silence is not accidental. It is the natural state of a focused mind. Overthinking returns when focus dissolves, which is why Stoics emphasized discipline of attention as much as discipline of behavior. You cannot control what thoughts arise, but you can choose which ones you feed. And feeding the present starves the unnecessary. There is also humility in this principle. It accepts that you do not need to understand everything to live well. Understanding is useful, but it is not required for action. The Stoic acts first, reflects later, not impulsively but decisively. This prevents paralysis. Most overthinking is not intelligence. It is hesitation disguised as depth. The Stoic strips away the disguise. They ask, what is the simplest responsible action available to me? And they do it. Again and again. This builds trust, not in the world, but in yourself. You begin to experience that you can meet moments as they arrive, that you do not need to pre-live them, that the mind does not need to carry tomorrow, today. This realization alone lightens the mental load. The present moment becomes enough, not because it is perfect, but because it is real. And reality, when faced directly, is almost always less overwhelming than imagination. This is why Stoics warned against borrowing trouble from the future. The future will arrive with its own demands. You do not need to meet them early. Meet what is here. And when you do, the mind begins to trust the process. It quiets, not because everything is resolved, but because something is being done. Stillness follows action, not the other way around. So when your thoughts begin to spiral, do not argue with them endlessly. Redirect them. Return to the body, to the task, to the next honest step. This is how Stoic calm is built. Not by escaping life, but by inhabiting it fully. And each time you return, you strengthen the habit of presence. Over time, overthinking loses its grip, not because it's defeated, but because says it is no longer fed. This is how a quiet mind is trained, one moment at a time. There is a quiet truth most people avoid. Much of mental suffering does not come from what is happening. It comes from fighting the fact that it is happening. The mind resists weight. It resists discomfort. It resists uncertainty. And in that resistance, the burden doubles. The Stoics understood that pain is often unavoidable, but suffering is negotiable. Not because suffering is imaginary, but because it is shaped by how you relate to what you feel. Overthinking is often a refusal to accept the emotional weight of the moment. The mind keeps searching for a way out, a shortcut, a reason this should not be happening. But reality does not respond to negotiation. It responds to acceptance. This does not mean approval. It does not mean passivity. It does not mean giving up. It means acknowledging the truth of the moment without adding a second layer of struggle. Many people think calm comes from eliminating heaviness. The Stoics taught the opposite. Calm comes from carrying heaviness well. Think about how the mind behaves when something feels heavy. It tightens, it tenses, it demands relief. It says, "This is too much. I can't handle this. This shouldn't be happening to me." These thoughts feel protective, but they are not. They turn weight into threat, and when the mind perceives threat, it spirals. Acceptance interrupts that spiral, not by removing the weight, but by removing resistance to it. When you stop fighting the fact that something is heavy, the mind stops panicking. It still feels the weight, but it no longer amplifies it. This is a subtle distinction, but it changes everything. The Stoics did not seek comfort, they sought stability. Stability comes from knowing, I can carry this, not forever, not effortlessly, but for now. Acceptance is a decision to stop arguing with reality. And arguments with reality always end the same way. You lose and feel exhausted. Overthinking is often an attempt to outthink pain, to reason your way out of discomfort. But discomfort is not a logic problem. It is a physical and emotional experience, and experiences must be endured, not solved. The Stoic meets heaviness with grounded presence, not dramatizing it, not denying it, simply naming it. This is heavy. This is difficult. This requires strength. There is dignity in that. When you stop labeling heaviness as failure, it becomes training. Most people break not because life is unbearable, but because they believe it should be lighter by now. That belief creates bitterness. The Stoic removes the belief. They do not expect life to feel fair. They expect it to feel real. And reality includes pressure. This shift alone quiets the mind, because the mind stops protesting. It no longer needs to ask, why me? Why now? When will this end? Those questions do not relieve pain. They only extend it. Acceptance does not mean you like the weight. It means you stop flinching every time you feel it. This builds internal strength. Not the loud kind, not the performative kind. The quiet kind that allows you to stand still under pressure. The Stoics trained themselves to say, this belongs to today, not to tomorrow, not to their entire identity, just today. This contains the weight. Overthinking often stretches a single moment across your entire life. One mistake becomes a pattern, one emotion becomes a future. One setback becomes a story about who you are. Acceptance collapses time. It brings the experience back to now, and now is manageable, even when it is uncomfortable. There is another reason acceptance reduces mental noise. It removes the urgency to escape. When the mind believes it must escape immediately, it becomes frantic. It rushes, it loops, it panics. But when you accept the presence of weight, Urgency dissolves. You are no longer running from the moment. You are standing inside it. This creates space, and space allows clarity to return. The Stoics did not avoid hardship. They trained for it. They believed strength was built by meeting difficulty without collapse. This is why they practiced imagining hardship, not to suffer in advance, but to remove surprise. Surprise is what destabilizes the mind. Acceptance removes surprise. It says, yes, this is difficult, and I am still here. This quiet confidence changes how the mind behaves. It stops screaming. It stops bargaining. It focuses. Acceptance also restores agency. When you resist reality, you feel powerless. When you accept it, you regain choice. Not the choice to change everything, but the choice to respond well. Response is where freedom lives. You cannot control what life places on your shoulders, but you can control how you carry it. The Stoics believed that the mind becomes heavy when it believes it is being crushed. But heaviness does not crush by default. Resistance does. Acceptance distributes the weight. It grounds it. This is why acceptance often feels like relief, even though nothing external has changed. The relief comes from alignment. Your internal stance matches reality. No more friction, no more internal war. This does not mean the emotion disappears. Sadness may remain. Fear may remain. Uncertainty may remain. But they no longer dominate. They become passengers, not drivers. Overthinking thrives when emotions are unacknowledged. The mind keeps circling them, trying to make sense of what has not been accepted. Acceptance allows emotions to settle, not instantly, but naturally, like sediment in water. When the water is stirred, it remains cloudy. When left alone, it clears. Acceptance is leaving the water alone. It is trusting the process. This principle also builds resilience over time. Each time you accept weight without collapse, you prove something to yourself. That proof accumulates. And with it comes quiet confidence. The confidence that says, I have carried this before. I can carry it again. This confidence does not shout. It steadies. And a steady mind does not overthink as much. It does not need to anticipate every outcome. It does not need to rehearse every scenario. It trusts its capacity to respond. This trust is earned, not imagined, earned through acceptance. So when heaviness arrives, do not rush to remove it. First, remove resistance. Feel the weight fully. Stand with it. Breathe under it. Let the body learn that it is safe to remain present. This is how mental toughness is formed, not by numbing, not by distraction, not by forced positivity, but by quiet endurance. The Stoics did not seek to feel better immediately. They sought to be unshaken, and unshaken does not mean unfeeling. It means grounded. Acceptance grounds the mind. It reminds you that you are not fragile. You are adaptable. That what feels heavy today does not define your entire life, only your current moment. And moments pass. Even the heaviest ones. When you stop resisting them, they pass more quickly and leave less damage behind. This is how you move through life without being consumed by it. You do not fight the weight. You carry it with composure. And in doing so, you become stronger than the weight itself. This is Stoic calm, not the absence of pressure, but mastery within it. There is a moment the Stoics train themselves to recognize. It is the moment when the mind stops being useful and starts being loud, when thought no longer clarifies but overwhelms, when attention scatters across possibilities, regrets, imagined futures, and unresolved past. This is the moment where most people panic. They believe they need more thinking, more analysis, more planning. The Stoics did the opposite. They narrowed their world. They reduced life to what could be steadied, not what could be controlled, because control is fragile. Steadiness is not. Overthinking is the mind attempting to manage too much at once. It wants to solve the entire future in one sitting. It wants certainty where none exists. It wants relief now. But the human nervous system is not designed for that scope. The Stoics understood this intuitively. They trained the mind to shrink the battlefield, not because the problems disappeared, but because attention became disciplined. A scattered mind feels heavy. A focused mind feels capable. This principle is about reclaiming that focus, not by force, not by suppression, but by reduction. Most mental chaos comes from carrying responsibilities that were never yours to begin with, other people's reactions, outcomes that depend on chance, timelines you do not control, judgments you cannot predict. The Stoics drew a clear internal boundary. They asked one simple question: what is mine to steady right now? Not tomorrow, not next year, not forever. Right now. This question collapses noise, because the answer is always small. Your breath, your posture, your next action, your tone, your attention. That is it. Everything else expands beyond reach. Overthinking begins when the mind insists on holding what it cannot steady. It tightens around uncertainty and calls it responsibility. But it is not responsibility. It is overreach. The Stoics believed peace comes from proportion, giving each thing the amount of attention it deserves and no more. They refused to let imagined futures consume present strength. This is why they practiced mental reduction. They would mentally strip life down until only the essential remained, not as escapism, as discipline. When the mind feels overwhelmed, it is not because life is impossible, it is because attention is undisciplined. The Stoic trains attention like a muscle, not to roam freely, but to return, again and again. Return to what is near, return to what is steady, return to what responds to effort. This is not a retreat, it is a strategic withdrawal. Overthinking feeds on excess input, too many variables, too many comparisons, too many imagined consequences. The Stoic interrupts this by narrowing focus. They live in a smaller mental room, and within that room, they are strong. This principle does not ask you to care less. It asks you to care correctly. There is a difference. Caring about everything equally leads to exhaustion. Caring deeply about what you can steady leads to clarity. This is why Stoic calm often feels grounded, not detached, not cold, grounded. The Stoics believed attention is your most valuable resource. Once spent, it does not return easily, so they guarded it fiercely. They did not allow it to be hijacked by every thought, every fear, every imagined outcome. They chose where it rested. This choice is where mental clarity begins. When the mind starts spiraling, notice what it is trying to carry. You will often find it holding entire narratives, entire futures, entire judgments, none of which can be resolved in the present moment. The Stoic response is not to argue with these thoughts, but to refuse to follow them. They do not chase the mind, they anchor it. Back to the body, back to the breath, back to the task. This is not avoidance, it is alignment. Alignment with reality. Reality only unfolds one moment at a time. The Stoics refused to live ahead of themselves. They understood that living mentally in the future weakens you in the present, and the present is where strength is required. This principle also removes the illusion of urgency. Overthinking creates false emergencies. It convinces you that everything must be resolved immediately. The Stoic questions this urgency. They slow down, not externally and turn. They move with intention, not panic. Reducing life to what can be steadied creates an inner stillness even when the world is noisy. Because the mind is no longer trying to manage the uncontrollable. It becomes selective, intentional, calm. This selectivity is not laziness, it is wisdom. The Stoics believed clarity comes from knowing what to ignore. Ignoring is not weakness, it is strength. The ability to let go of mental noise is one of the highest forms of discipline. This is why Stoic calm feels rare. Most people never practice reduction. They add, they accumulate, they worry. The Stoic subtracts. They remove unnecessary thought, unnecessary concern, unnecessary self-interrogation. They conserve energy. This energy is then available when action is required. A mind that is always busy is rarely effective. A mind that is quiet moves decisively. Reducing life also restores dignity. When you stop reacting to everything, you regain composure. Your movements slow, your speech becomes measured. Your presence becomes solid. People sense this, not because you dominate, but because you are not scattered. The Stoics valued this composure deeply. They believed inner order precedes outer influence. You cannot guide others if you cannot steady yourself. This principle is not about withdrawal from life. It is about entering life correctly, one moment at a time. One responsibility at a time, one action at a time. Overthinking collapses when the mind is given something real to hold, something grounded, something present. The Stoics often return to physical anchors, walking, writing, working, breathing, not to distract, but to remind the mind where it belongs, in the body, in the moment, in reality. This is why Stoic practice feels practical. It does not rely on affirmations, it relies on discipline, and discipline is comforting because it provides structure. Structure quiets the mind. When the mind knows what it is responsible for, it relaxes. Confusion creates anxiety. Clarity dissolves it. Reducing life to what can be steadied is how clarity is restored. Not by answering every question, but by unnecessary ones. The Stoics believed the mind becomes loud when it is untrained. Training the mind does not mean suppressing thought, it means directing it purposefully, repeatedly, until focus becomes habit. This habit is what carries you through heavy seasons, not optimism, not motivation. Habit. The habit of narrowing attention, the habit of grounding, the habit of presence. When everything feels heavy, do not expand your mental load. Reduce it. This is strength. This is Stoic clarity. Not loud, not dramatic. Quiet, steady, enduring. And when the mind learns this, overthinking loses its grip, because there is no longer room for it to spread. Only space for what matters. Only space for what you can steady. And that is enough. At this point, nothing more needs to be added. You already know what happens when the mind is left undisciplined. You have lived it. You have felt the weight of unnecessary thought, the exhaustion of internal noise, the drain of reacting instead of directing. The Stoics did not promise a life without difficulty. They promised something more valuable, a mind that does not collapse under it. Mental clarity is not something you wait for. It is something you practice quietly, daily, without witnesses. It begins the moment you decide to stop carrying what is not yours, to steady what is within reach, to move forward without needing certainty, not tomorrow, not when life becomes easier. Now, if this way of thinking resonates with you, do not treat it as entertainment. Treat it as a standard, a personal oath, an agreement with yourself to return to this discipline whenever the mind begins to scatter. You do not need motivation. You do not need intensity. You need reminders, anchors, places you return to when the noise grows loud again. If you choose to make this space one of those anchors, let it be a quiet decision. Not for me, not for an algorithm, for yourself. A signal that you are done negotiating with unnecessary chaos, that you are training steadiness, that you are choosing clarity as a way of living. Nothing dramatic, nothing announced, just consistent return. The Stoics believed you are always becoming something. With every thought you entertain, every habit you repeat, every moment you either direct or drift. This is your reminder. When the mind feels heavy, reduce. When the noise returns, steady. When the world pulls outward, come back inward and continue, silently, deliberately, unshaken.